Metaphor Refantazio has wonderful world building and a fantastic narrative, which is reflected by the fact that it won Best Narrative at this year's Game Awards. So, I'm inspired to do a video analyzing this game's story, but I thought it'd be more fun for us if I also ranked the story arcs of this game while we do our in-depth analysis. Since this game doesn't clarify when a story arc starts and finishes, I'm considering an arc as when you have an adventure in a location. In other words, each time that you have a deadline on your calendar. This means that there are 11 story arcs within this game's narrative, and I'm going to rank each one from worst to best. Let's get into it. So, in last place we have Martyra. Let me make one thing clear off rip. I am not saying that Martyra's arc was bad. In fact, it had some of my favorite writing in the entire game, which means it also has some of my favorite writing in any game ever. Martyra coming in last is a testament to the quality of Metaphor's narrative, rather than a suggestion that this is a bad section of the game. With that cleared up, let's talk about the Martyra arc. It kicks off when you cross paths with Barden in the Bounty Hunt Center. Essentially, he's trying to find somebody to hunt down the criminal behind a series of kidnappings in his town Martyra. The alleged kidnapper is an exiled member of the Shadow Guard who lives in a giant sandworm's nest close to town. You, of course, take him up on this request and head to Martyra to sort the situation out and stop the kidnappings. So, here's the thing with the Martyra arc. I appreciate how many layers of mystery exist within this part of the narrative, but at the same time, I feel that it is slightly lacking in a subtlety that would really allow this arc to be peak. To elucidate, you have the mystery of the kidnapper, the mystery of the status of the giant sandworm, the mystery of what's happening to the victims after you define that Heismay didn't do it, the mystery of who's helping Morris after you reveal his traitorous nature, and the mystery of what human lurks beneath the castle. These are all compelling plot points, but the issue is that, at least in my opinion, everything was a little bit too obvious. Every single one of these mysteries, you basically were able to ascertain the truth quite a bit prior to the reveal. I think this is due to two reasons. The first reason is the writing is a bit too handholdy at times in this arc. For example, characters may make small comments like, so that's what's happening. And these comments just aren't needed. Let the player think for themselves a little bit, or maybe just put an exclamation mark over a character's head when they notice something, but no dialogue, if you want to highlight a character's perception. The other reason is that there's a big lack of red herrings in this section. If you don't know what a red herring is, it's a piece of information that is intended to be misleading or distracting. So, for example, when you first meet Barden and Martyra and meet Morris, it's painfully obvious Morris will betray you because there's literally nobody else who is an option to do so at that point in time. When you confront Morris with Heismay, it's painfully obvious that Joanna is his accomplice because there's no alternative to consider at that point in time. Therein lies the main weakness of this arc. The handling of the mysteries is a bit clunky. Secondarily, another thing that contributes to this arc placing last for me is a little bit less tangible. It's just the overall feeling in this section of the game. Martyra is kind of boring. I like Barden, but he isn't particularly charismatic or deeply interesting. The town itself is a bit boring to explore with nothing of note taking place. The vistas in his town are boring with no unique or discernible traits. This is definitely the least interesting area in the entire game, in my opinion, in terms of aesthetics and the unique fantasy elements. Even the music, I wouldn't say it's bad, but the town music is just boring and sleepy here. I say all of this because atmosphere lends itself to storytelling. It's an important component to storytelling. That said, there are areas where the story here shines. The section directly prior to meeting Heismay, inside the worm, was a really cool and whimsical dungeon design, and it's a strength that it happens so early in the game because it kind of puts you under the impression or expectation that there will be more dungeons at this level of creativity for the rest of the game. There's a few more, but less than you'd hope. It does a great job increasing the scope of your imagination as you navigate the game. The strongest part of this section, though, is undoubtedly the handling of Heismay and Joanna. I think this is one of the segments of this game where the writing feels the most real and raw. The tragedy of their situations as they both lost their children to the cruelty of the world has utterly broken them. The difference is, Joanna takes her pain out on the world and disassociates, refusing to accept her child is truly gone, and Heismay retreats to a cave and withdraws from society, hoping that a monster kills him eventually. Atlus loves to play around with the concept of two sides of the same coin trope with their characters, and this is undoubtedly one of those cases. When the two characters come together, I think the writing couldn't have been executed better. There's no accusations of villainy, no condemnation of actions or failures. It's simply two broken people communicating their pains, having finally found someone else who could share the burden, who could understand the pain. I think it was great writing that even though you're the protagonist, you take a back seat in the climax of this arc. But for me personally, I'm not sure there's enough here to justify Martyra ranking any higher.
I sense there's more to this story, hmm?
The truth is, we're going after Luis.
Luis, the monstrous child himself, eh? So you're not just grasping at power. You've got convictions.
So, of course, the Day of Calamity is your first mission of the game after the prologue. The main antagonist here is Zorba, someone who lands in the pantheon of top glazers of all time. It's in this section of the game where you learn a little bit more about Luis's ideologies, both through his entrance into the plaza and through your run-ins with Zorba throughout the Grand Cathedral. What's also cool about this one is you get the social link with Katharina within this dungeon, which is conceptually very cool. I think it raises immersion, the fact that you are on your mission and then you kind of just run into her and then help her out with something. It makes the world feel more lived in unless you're on a mission. This is a video game, reach the endpoint. The start of this social link also serves as effective world building, as it highlights the disparity between the quote-unquote higher races and the quote-unquote lower races. It's always good when the narrative is able to accomplish multiple things at once. While you learn that Katharina is a virtuous person trying her best to make it in the world, you also learn through what happens to her friend a bit more of what the world is really like. I think this section of the game gives really excellent foreshadowing. What specifically comes to mind is when Luis descends from the Gauntlet Runner. He descends with flowers that are considered to be the royal family's flower. Later on, you find them blooming at the Elden Sanctum. So, of course, the flowers in this scene are a hint that tells you that Luis is linked with the late king, and then later on they tell you that Luis is also somehow linked with the Elden people. This speaks to, personally, what I find most fun about Atlus video games is that the stories they craft always leave you hints to later reveals and twists. I actually made a video prior to this game's release where I correctly predicted that Luis didn't curse the prince. Got the culprit wrong, but hey, I didn't have much to go on. To continue, I thought the confrontations with Zorba here were well done. This is another area where they are able to convey multiple things concurrently in their storytelling. You see, Zorba is quite clearly mixed race, and he is a zealot for Luis to the point that he refuses to destroy a picture of Luis, even though that would allow him to also destroy a threat to Luis. What this tells you is that Luis is offering the beaten down people of the world hope, and a place where they feel welcome, while also telling you that the world is fundamentally broken. Luis is in direct opposition of the world state, and yet many people and races flock to his banner. He murdered the king, and people don't care. You could also glean from the fact that Zorba alone is carrying out this critical mission for Luis, not only how much Luis trusts in him, but also that he'd sacrifice anyone and anything for his ideals. He views other people as pieces on a chessboard. I think in this section of the game, the layers of meanings in these scenes are extremely well done, which makes for tight and efficient storytelling. Now, I only have a few major gripes with this section. Firstly, I do feel the balance is slightly off in terms of world building versus storytelling. As I highlighted before, the storytelling they do have is pretty tight work, but most of this section is just world building. You get drip-fed lore and things about the world as you traverse an extremely long dungeon that feels like it's never going to end. It's not a very involved or engaging section of the game, admittedly. A lot of the runtime here is just going floor to floor in the cathedral and encountering zombies and Luis's soldiers. While they build him up in this dungeon, long term, there's not really any real payoff for the classifications of Luis's soldiers, so it does feel like a bit of wasted airtime that they focus on the ranks of Luis's soldiers so much here. Maybe a few more Zorba substitutions for these encounters, or maybe even a run-in with the Magnus brothers, would have done more to enhance the intrigue in this section of the game. My other gripe is the final boss of this section. It just suspends my belief a little bit that you fight this enormous human in the center of town and basically nobody sees it or knows that it was you who slayed the human. All in all, a good starting area for the game that kind of bears the cross of having to establish the world state a bit and let you know what's going on.
I had thought to gather an unstoppable swell of magma, but it doesn't matter anymore. Those lordly pigs can drown in their own dread. Sanctism cannot save this world. If we are to be ruled by a god, then let it be Lord Luis!
So I think this is a really strong arc that delivers some great payoffs. I love that Luis was able to have a conversation with the king, and I also love the idea that he's Elda as well. That's a component that strengthens Atlus's favorite trope, that of course being the two sides of the same coin trope. In this case, between you, the protagonist, and Luis. I think the peak of this narrative arc is that moment between Luis and the king and the scenes of Luis alone in the palace talking to himself. These are so good because this is the first and only time in the entire game that you get a look at Luis's authentic, true self. In every other scene, he has some element of facade because he's with other characters or in front of a crowd, or he has something to gain. But in these scenes, he has zero reason to uphold any pretense and finally has a chance to vent his frustrations unfiltered. And what you confirm about him is that he truly wants to make a better world, and he's not in pursuit of any form of revenge or anything self-serving. In other words, he's in pursuit of a positive reformation to the world state for the good of the people. He acknowledges that while there is peace, it isn't authentic because there's only peace because of a societal system of predator and prey, where certain races are thrown under heel. Might be a matter of personal preference, but I enjoyed that Luis is authentically doing something that he deems for the good of the world, not himself. He genuinely is doing a selfless act, at least in his own warped views. This is more compelling to me than a villain who has inherently selfish goals. I also enjoyed the reveal about the royal magic greatly. I thought it was a wonderfully clever way to explain why this type of magic reigned supreme and how it was that only kings could wield it. Now I think your actual traversal of the royal palace as a dungeon probably had a bit more potential. I think it would have made a better story if instead of aloof memories that you watch like a Netflix show, you instead are able to converse with the king and have different conversations, similar to how Luis is able to converse with him when he enters the palace. Maybe these scenes could have been laced with a few more subtle hints that would suggest to you Moore's true identity. Maybe the king would ask you some leading questions to test your worthiness, and if you answer correctly in his estimation, by the end of the dungeon he would tell you that he thinks you are truly worthy of the throne, or if you answer wrongly, he'd plead for you to run and find somewhere safe, as he doesn't think you have what it takes and would rather see you live. Sequencing it like this would perhaps make this dungeon feel less chore heavy and more involved. I believe Atlus's storytelling is at its best when you feel as if you are playing the story, rather than when you feel like you are playing the game to get to the next piece of storytelling. The Royal Palace definitely feels like the latter for its duration. I thought the confrontation with Zorba was well done. Zorba's grotesque transformation showcased both Zorba and Luis's commitment to their ideals. For me, it was the right choice that at no point did Zorba sway from supporting Luis. And I also appreciate how they made it clear at its end that Zorba legitimately wants a world that is better for everybody and isn't just being vindictive for what he had to suffer as a half-blood. Basilio put it best: out of everyone following Lord Luis, Zorba was the only one who truly understood and identified with his vision. Now, we need to talk about the Dragon Temples. I believe that when it comes to storytelling in this game, this subplot probably has the most missed potential. You see, this quest expounds on the lore of some of the legends that you've heard throughout the game, but it fails in that it reuses bland environments and silos the storytelling through lines from Agrica. The impact of this story would have been far better if instead you uncovered a hidden, unique, ancient location where this questline would take place, somewhere important to the hero kings of old where you could find their belongings or stumble onto some of their personal accounts. In addition to that setting, you could then have Agrica accompany you throughout the area or meet you at certain points and provide context and info for relics that you stumbled upon. I think had they done it like this, they could have expanded the lore that they reveal a bit more and also accomplished storytelling through what you're told and through the setting or what you see.
The people must think I'm the one behind the madness in their hearts. Okay. I can see why you felt such hopelessness. The more anxious the people grow, the more they choose blind fanaticism over confronting their fears. This was no fault of yours, simply their nature. Knowing all this, I shall claim the ideals you abandoned and finish it in your stead.
This arc has a different flavor to the rest of the game, which I can appreciate. While the gameplay is a bit mundane as far as the sneaking sections on the ship, I appreciate the suspense and feel of the story in this arc. You almost have a slight sense of foreboding as you and your crew enter the Lion's Maw, so to speak, and move to infiltrate Luis's ship and look for the curse's recipe. Maybe it goes without saying, but one of the main metrics of a good story is the feeling that it invokes in you as you experience it. The Brawlhaven arc does very well to switch things up. You are basically in a state of worry throughout the entire arc that something, anything's going to go amiss, between going around the guard captains and taking them down and the actual night of the infiltration. Now, let's highlight the strengths of this arc, starting with Luis. In a previous video, I described Luis as the Atlus of this story, meaning that basically the entire narrative of the game rests on his shoulders. In other words, he is the core catalyst to this game's excellence. In this arc, you get a closer look into his ethos when Stroll confronts him during your infiltration on the Shiradrius. I like this moment for both characters. Stroll is very tactical and quite measured most of the time, but he loses it in the one moment that you'd want him to be measured and tactical. When he confronts Luis about the destruction of his village and Luis nonchalantly confirms that he basically made that happen, Stroll shoots up like he's going to assault the man at his own soiree. I think when characters depart from their established nature, it humanizes them more. This is a fascinating moment for Luis because you can glean from his brief initial flash of sadness and then his cold logic afterwards that Luis isn't on this crusade for cruelty's sake, and that he isn't committing all of his atrocious acts just for the sake of evil, but he is fully committed to doing literally anything to reach his ideals. Another Luis detail in this arc that I love but is more subtle is that when you infiltrate the Charadrius the night of the soiree and finally make it to his private quarters, there's a vase full of the royal flowers there. I love this hint because these are his private quarters, so these aren't placed there for spectacle or to make a statement in the way that he used them when he arrived at Grand Trad at the start of the game. No, this is a little hint meant to say to you, think about this more. What does this mean? A great example of storytelling through setting. I love little details like this in Atlus's games. Moving on, I think the climax to the mystery subplot surrounding Juna was well executed. It was a good payoff to multiple offhand comments earlier in the game about how there was another agent who was striving for a cure on behalf of the prince. One thing I do feel was done poorly, however, was the context provided around Juna being revealed as the other agent. It's very telling that when I sat down to record this video, I literally couldn't remember how exactly Juna got involved with the prince's faction. The reason I couldn't remember is that the game very flippantly explains this and doesn't care to create an enthralling or interesting circumstance that led to Juna joining up. Juna says, almost verbatim, "I tend to find myself in honored company and I happened to be around where a resistance operative was doing a spot of recon. I requested to join. When fate beckons, one can't just turn her away. This seemed like a chance for a once-in-a-lifetime inspiration for my art." Okay, so they basically don't give us any inclination into the circumstances of Juna becoming this agent for the Resistance. We basically don't know the who, we don't know the when, the where, or the how. We just know what happened, which is that Juna joined and became the other agent. I can't really wrap my head around the creative decision to provide zero context no matter what angle I approach it at. It just comes across as lazy or an oversight, to be honest. Of course, Juna's archetype awakening and joining to your cause also goes hand in hand with the conclusion of Glidel's character arc. I wonder if I overestimated him or not, but I was a bit surprised to see Glidel bite it this early in the story. I had been envisioning him as an antagonistic rival for the protagonist who was underrated by the rest of the world, whose machinations might see him at least make it all the way to the penultimate arc or so before a final confrontation with you. I thought he would maybe grow as you grew throughout the story until eventually he was a worthy adversary and gave you a run for your money. But I guess he literally was as stupid as others viewed him, or rather the world had rated him appropriately as not a serious person. His end felt unceremonious and pathetic, and maybe that was the point.
Do I offend you? Are you repulsed? Surely it helps you realize that you can protect nothing without power. The natural blessings you enjoyed are not infinite. Few have the luxury of living with no need to struggle and harm just to survive. But our nation would have you believe such hardship is born of moral weakness. So the punished are punished further. They die in silence like livestock. Their reality denied. It defies reason. All people deserve the chance to fight for their lives with their lives. Some will fall, some will triumph, and therein is true equality forged, however cruel.
Okay, so like I mentioned earlier, I made a video before the game came out about how I thought Luis was being framed and that he didn't curse the prince. So, I think I may have felt the impact of the Rella reveal a little bit less than other players may have. That said, I do feel like the storytelling was effective. Part of what I talked about in that video was how, if you watch the way the caster handles themselves in this scene, they 100% do not look like someone with combat ability, overwhelming magic, and military prowess to the point that they are described as a monster, which is how Luis was described as a child. The way they ran from the situation where there's only 2 other warriors and how they allow themselves to get slashed in the back with 0 resistance, the hints were always there. And turns out the caster handled themselves in this way because they were literally scared child. I like that when it comes to Rella, she's not actually an actor who is pretending to be a righteous, wholesome savior savant. That is her true self. And what she did to the prince is what was fake about her, if you will. She's a victim who was forced to commit an atrocity to save her beloved sister, and serves as one of the many devices within the story to convey to you that the world is broken. Rella comes from a privileged family and was a magical savant, and yet still, the world chewed her up and spit her back out. This goes back to what I was saying before about the storytelling in this game being extremely effective. It works best when it conveys to convey to you multiple things concurrently. While from a storytelling perspective, I did like how they concluded Rella's arc and how her story exists within the larger narrative conceptually, I do think it was a missed opportunity to not flesh out more her desire to ensure that you and your group could be entrusted to save the world through her sacrifice. Of course, in one of my past videos where I analyzed this game at large, I did talk about one of my gripes being that there needed to be a dungeon at the Mage Academy, rather than just a single confrontation. Throughout this dungeon, as you made your progress, you could have had Rella prodding you and probing you with questions about your ideals and what you plan to do should you ascend the throne, and just in general, testing your mettle more to see if you could truly stand up to Luis. This would have allowed Rella to shine as a mage, perhaps creating magical obstacles and scenarios for you to overcome, and also would have allowed her to maintain the facade of an enemy for a bit longer. Again, conceptually I like their decisions when it comes to Rella, but the scenario is undoubtedly rushed. They almost give you whiplash how quickly she goes from pretending to be evil to conceding she's not evil, to then being like, "Aight bro, so can you handle Luis or nah?" To then being like, "Well, I'm dying either way, so figure that shit out. Peace. Love you, Juna." One other note about Rella. The way the people so quickly accepted her as their champion was a very fascinating concept that I wish they explored more. What is so intriguing about the king's magic he casted upon his death is that it shows you who is authentically the most desired ruler in the people's hearts. Rella is so beloved that the people refer to her as Saint Rella. She has healed and saved countless people during her time in Grand Trad. Wouldn't it have made sense for Rella to have at least been in the top 5 from the very start of the game? How interesting would it have been to see the Senate debate about what to do with Rella basically siphoning some votes from Forden? What if the Senate splintered into factions and some rallied around promoting Rella as the main representative for the Sanctus Church? What if Rella saw this as an opportunity to finally get revenge on Forden, and she made it her mission throughout the narrative to gain the people's support and weaken Forden? Perhaps surmising that once she had the king's magic, she could have enough power to heal herself and lift the curse on the prince, maybe thinking that while the king couldn't do it, she is a magical savant who could perhaps find a solution once she sat the throne. This also could be a cool splitting point in the narrative where maybe after Forden dies and you confront Rella, you have a choice to pledge yourself to her cause and work with her to get her on the throne, or decide that you can't put that much faith in her and would rather trust in yourself and demand that she lift the curse right away. I think this would add some good weight to the narrative, but I can understand that Atlus doesn't typically branch the games this early on in their stories. They usually just have 1 or 2 critical decisions towards the end of the game. This is a great way to preserve the canon and ensure that story told is the story that they want to tell, so I completely respect it, to be fair. Anyways, getting into the Day of the Duel portion of this arc, I don't think it could have been better executed, especially considering that it is the middle child, so to speak, of your fights with Luis. By that I mean, since it's not the first or the last Luis fight, it's difficult to give it the attention it deserves and the spectacle it deserves within the narrative, but I think Atlus nailed it. I love the symbolism prior to the battle of Luis standing alone and you standing with a member of every single race behind you. Obviously this shows the protagonist's ability to connect with people and to strengthen his ideals, and it shows how Luis has abandoned the current idea of society and wishes to tear it all down no matter what. In other words, you are a reformer and he is an abolitionist, which is all well and good, but the world he would replace this one with is harsh and cruel and would sacrifice the weak, so we can't allow that to stand. Strength, of course, is meant to protect the weak, not abandon them. To continue, I like that when Batlin asks if you have any last words, it's not you who speaks but Stroll instead. Something this story does very well is let the party members actually play to their strengths within the narrative. This is another great example of that. I like the play Luis makes at the end of the duel because it's another example of the fact that Luis never lies, but he is liable to withholding information, or rather crafting narratives draped in truth that conveniently leave out information that provides context. Of course, Luis claims that you, as an Elda, are a member of the cursed human race. Honestly, it was a political and tactical masterclass by Luis to not simply smite you, but to create a stage on which him forcing you to turn human would have the maximum impact, while at the same time occupying you from going to the real prince's side, who Luis probably perceives as the only threat to him ascending the throne. It is also kind of hilarious how Luis uses the hatred people have against the Elda to further sway the people to his cause, when he's literally an Elda. Luis always be on some bullshit, and it honestly is just so peak. Having to scurry out the capital with your tail between your leg and your ranking plummeting was a really effective way to build late game suspense and subvert the expectations some players may have had that this was a final confrontation, and after this you would get to see the prince do the happily ever after routine.
If you would make this a country where it is no sin to be weak or ignorant, you need strength to shape it. Let us prove that strength here. Rella!
Then let's go. If you're gonna put your life on the line for this, then it's only right we do the same.
Come, Sogne of the Ice Valley! Come, O Pillar of the Five Chromatic Dragons, harbingers of earthly war! Heed my call, and unleash your fury once again before us!
We've got no choice.
Okay, so there isn't a lot to this section of this game, to be frank, relative to the other sections, so I won't stay here long. It's essentially just a prince reveal and then a lore dump. The reason why I have this so high on the list is because of how they handled the Chosen One trope, and also because the lore is pretty fucking good. So, the prince is one of my favorite decisions that they made with the narrative. I think it's a wonderful subversion of the Chosen One trope. You're the physical embodiment of the prince's ideals, but the entire world and you yourself think that you're nothing but a member of the lowest tribe on the totem pole. I love this because it makes everything that you achieve feel earned. You climb all the way to second in the public's hearts for king, solely through your deeds, actions, and ideals, not due to your title or station. In fact, it was in spite of your title and station. You form connections and deep friendships with members of each race who all devote themselves to your cause and journey because of their faith in who you are as a person. This makes it feel less cheap when you rejoin with your original body and regain your memories and everyone understands that you are the prince, as opposed to if you'd been known as that from the start, because it conveys that you deserve to rule the kingdom not due to your bloodline, but due to your genuine ideals of a world without discrimination. Even though you are technically a chosen one, you earned everything, and actually if it was a race, you actually started behind everybody else in the story because you are an Elda. As far as the lore in this game, I think this is genuinely one of the best fictional worlds I've experienced. The world they built is arguably the best part of the game. The different races are all beautifully designed, and I love the explanation here for the races coming into being. I love the idea that the 9 different races, without accounting for half-bloods, all descend from humans like you and me. But the discovery of magic caused a worldwide conflict that eventually ended the world. So their world, which was much similar to ours, came to be known as a world before. The races in Metaphor Refantazio were either created artificially for the war effort in said conflict or naturally came to be to survive the hellscape that was the world post-war. This evolution, which would have taken eons, instead took a few centuries due to the Magla accelerating things. So I love the idea of human folly begetting the current fantastical state of the world. I think it's a boon that the world is rooted from a world similar to ours, as that bolsters the sense of immersion in spite of the fantasy setting. This is also where we explore the link between Magla and anxiety, and the idea that facing your anxiety, accepting it, and conquering it is what leads to mastery and effective use of magic. This is so good. Really an awesome metaphor for life. So I must say that this power system of magic is one of my favorites across all the fictional worlds I've experienced, mainly due to how they write it to be also relatable to real life. If you can accept your anxiety and conquer it, you'll be far more successful in life than if you can't. It can be a magical feeling indeed to triumph over anxiety. For what it is, the Elden Sanctum is close to perfectly done.
So let me get this straight. You're saying it's not a matter of our captain and his highness joining together, but that the former was this disembodied entity sprung from the latter?
Then that's why he had no memories? 'Cause he didn't even exist?
I see. Finally, I understand the strange feeling I had sensed upon our meeting. What shaped you, so to speak, was the prince's will itself, a part of his consciousness. Yes, the prince's very heart. He was his soul given flesh.
We now enter the top 5, and for me, it wouldn't feel right to do so without the prologue. By nature, your prologue cannot have the most interesting concepts or moments or scenarios. After all, you haven't met anyone, you don't know what the rules are, and you don't know the world. But I think this prologue does its job beautifully, and that job is to make you want to learn more. First thing you see is the king get immersed by this dude with a fascinating character design, while he talks about how fucked up the world is. Then you're in a carriage entering the city and get attacked by magic igniters, and this lady with red hair starts cutting them down as you get shoved off a cliff. So you see what the game is doing so well here is it's creating intriguing questions for you, the player, to want answers to. A lot of prologues fail in that they get too in the weeds of trying to introduce you to everyone and everything so that after the introduction, then they are able to tell you the story that they want to. The biggest testament I can give to Metaphor's prologue is that the storytelling is perfectly paced, interesting questions get thrown at you, but while you're getting asked them, again, they are able to do what they do so well, tell you multiple things at once. Louise murdered the king, but also, the king's magic is OP and should have protected him, and also, the world is horrible. There are bandits that rove around outside of Grand Trad, but also, magic is utilized for igniters, and also, racism is rampant. The prologue is full of scenarios like that efficiently bringing you up to speed while making you feel like you are not just there to learn how things work so you can start the real story after. The prologue is also home to what is, for my money, the absolute best archetype awakening scene in the game. While the protagonist archetype awakening scene is well done, Stroll's definitely takes home the gold. Explosive character development, spectacle, and cinematography, this has it all. What's most interesting about Stroll and his fit in the narrative is that on paper, his character and background essentially reads like he should be the main character. He's a noble, everyone he loved died in a horrific event, and he has an uncompromising sense of justice and honor that he is determined to see through. That definitely makes for a compelling companion, someone whose lead at times you follow in spite of your roles. The prologue shines in part due to the introduction of this amazing character.
If that's the real world, then it can die alongside you! My name is Leon Stroll de Halietus. My home and my family were taken from me. I am the last of my house. I am the last of my noble bloodline. And in the name of my people, I will strike you down where you stand!
And here we have the climax to this game. Brilliant. We delve into Luis's psyche in the final confrontation here, and his ideals are cemented here as truly selfless. Warped, certainly, but Luis isn't doing any of this for personal gain or for revenge on the world that wronged him. He's doing it because he truly wants to save the world by essentially burning it down and replacing it. It's basically the idea of destructing a house because the walls are too rotten or the structure's integrity is compromised, and then building a new construction home in the place where it stood. What's interesting is that part of what led to this ethos from Luis isn't mainly the raising of the Elden Sanctum, but rather what the Sanctum was like before that even happened. Luis despised how isolated and secretive the Elden people were from the rest of the world. Ironically, he wanted to be able to exist in the world freely and exist in comfort amongst the other races and people of the world. The irony, of course, being that Luis ends up as a lone pillar who deliberately forms connections with nobody and views people as pieces on a chessboard, with the goal of the chess match being to reach his ideals, when all he wanted was to freely exist with other people and have an open community. To clarify, it wasn't just the raising of the Sanctum, but the world state itself that put Luis on this path. This is another great example of quality writing, which is when they layer with multiple different events or reasons to explain a character's motivations. Because, in real life, your reasons for wanting to complete one of your major goals are often not as simple as A plus B equals C. The formula behind your desire to do something tends to be more complex. I want to stop here and take a closer look at what I mentioned before. Two sides, same coin. You and Luis. You both share this exact same formative event that sent your lives on an eventual collision course to battle for the throne, that being the Elden Sanctum being raised by the Sanctus Church. I love that, in the most simple sense, you and Luis want the same thing. A world free of injustice with oppressive systems making it so that most people are downtrodden. The key difference is how much you are willing to sacrifice to achieve that world. Luis is willing to sacrifice every single person in the world who isn't strong, and you want to save everyone and show everyone a better way. So my point is, I love when villains in a story aren't just straight up evil. Don't get me wrong, Luis is a bad dude and very much lost in the sauce of means justify the ends. But I find that a story is much more enthralling when the antagonist is less, I hate you and everything you stand for and you're wrong, and more, we want the same thing, but I couldn't disagree more about your methods and the steps you want to take to achieve the goal. Continuing along, I think it was a brilliant decision to have Luis succumb to anxiety. Throughout the narrative, Luis is the indomitable pillar of strength. Nobody comes close to him. You and your party use legendary magic, and yet you never defeat him all the way up until the end of the game. So I think it's a really cool message to us that even the mentally and physically strongest person conceivable can succumb to their innermost anxieties. We all need community in some way, shape, or form, and we all need to feel supported and loved by our fellow humans, as these help to mitigate against anxiety and bolster our mental health. Not even invincible Luis could go it all the way on his own. Of course, within this conflict, we also have the culmination of Mor's arc. It's just brilliant. I like that he's the manifestation of the king's ideals in a similar way that for much of your journey, you are that for the prince. I touched upon this in my last video, but I think it's pretty wholesome that, in a way, this story allowed the prince to experience this journey with both of his parents' hands on his shoulders, so to speak, pushing him forward from behind. Their love for him was so immense that the dregs of their spirits linger on to guide him on his fated journey. For my anime people, this may remind you of what Naruto experiences in his journey. This is powerful stuff, and a reminder for us that our loved ones never truly leave us. While it's literal in this game, it's worthy to remember that the essence of our loved ones will always be carried on within us. I also love how, at the end, Mor doesn't just blindly support the prince and say, "You can do anything, son," but instead, like any parent, once he gets fearful for his son's safety, he tries to hold on to him. So in this moment, he fails to conquer his anxiety. The story conveys to us through his actions as Hypholodius, and in this moment that Mor is somebody who loves so deeply that it irreparably breaks his spirit when those he loves are harmed or under the threat of danger. It's telling that this is true for Mor as well, when he is essentially supposed to be the condensation of the king's ideals. I love that eventually his son the prince is able to help Mor to understand what a true king is in body and soul. Mor, or Hypholodius, was never suited for the task in spite of his ideals, but his son is. In a perfect world, Mor probably would be the advisor to the king, and he almost plays that to the prince on this journey. Hypholodius invoking the royal magic and creating a new system of kings having to earn the throne through public support rather than inheriting it through genetic bloodlines ensures a lower likelihood in the future that someone as unfit as Mor ever ascends the throne. This reminds me of Barden of all people. Both Hypholodius and Barden fall under the theme that just because you are inherently good, it does not make you fit to rule. And this is a question or challenge that the game's characters continually pose to you throughout the narrative through direct questioning and debates with other candidates. You're good and want to help everyone. So what? The world is more complex than that, and it will require complex and adaptable thinking to actually find a solution. There is no magic overnight fix, which leads into the next section.
The kingdom rests in your hands now. If there is yet any value to believing in something beyond us, prove to me that fantasy has the power to color reality. Now, onward, O King of a new dawn!
I think this is one of the most satisfying epilogues I have experienced. Every single decision they made I thought was brilliant. They show you the conclusion after the final fight and allow you to see the prince get coronated and have the moment you've worked for your entire playthrough. But they don't have it end there. They allow you to see what the world is like a year after the conclusion of the game. And what they show you is that things are better and that there is more or less peace, but utopia has not been achieved. You and your supporters from the journey have coalesced into a really cohesive and effective form of government with roles that make sense for each other. You get to go around town and speak with everybody from your journey and experience the foundation of the world you fought for. Obviously this section is short, so I'll keep this relatively short, but the word is satisfying. The ending could not have been more satisfying from a writing point of view.
I'll have to let my work prove my words. With results, I hope everyone can feel that our future will be brighter.
You went from a nobody to the top seat in the nation. No need to puff up and bluster anymore, what? You'll do fine.
A ruler must only stand tall. The rest is not done alone. We are with you.
Indeed. And we're no strangers to more practical work. Whatever our tasks, I'm sure we can handle them.
Well, it is time to make your first appearance as our king. Let us brace ourselves.
Good luck.
Thanks for always having my back.
Well, let's go. To His Majesty, the new king.
This arc is peak. In a game with so much going on in terms of world building and different characters and different concepts to understand, this legitimately feels like the point in the story where everything just hits its flow state and is perfect. You know the world, you know the characters, you know your goals, you know your challenges, but at the same time, at each turn in this arc you learn something that challenges your established view of all of these things. This arc gets off to a rocky start with the human attack on your ship as it crosses the sea. I feel like a broken record, but what makes this event really good is the writing tells you multiple things at once. Encountering this monster clues you into the fact that perhaps Forden and the Sanctus Church aren't as righteous as they claim to be, considering that they blatantly lied about slaying the human at sea. But at the same time, this event does a great job characterizing the Brothers Magnus. In spite of them being your enemies, they come together with you to fight the monster off. There's an ensuing event afterwards where you get to share an intimate moment with one of the many characters on your ship, and for my money, each of these scenes are really well done. You enter onto the homeland of the unique Mustari, the only race you've met in this game so far whose faces you've literally yet to see, whose people are few and far between on your journey. The second you set foot on the island, you're met with a mystery, as you hear a voice in your head who turns out to be Yufa, which is a super clever hint or early clue to you that you're not actually human, but the condensed Magla of the prince's ideals. You discover more about the Mustari's deep connection with Magla that is only second to fairies, and how their whole religion is based on the worship of the dragon god. It's here that we have some of the most intriguing lore in the game, that being the relationship between the priestess of the village and the dragon god. How warped that relationship became over time is meant to convey to you that you probably shouldn't take everything at its face value in this world, and that you shouldn't accept things as so because the world tells you to. For far too long, the people of Uchronia have done so, and that apathy is perhaps what is most culpable to the current unjust state of the world. This is one of the deeper looks into one of the game's overarching messages, and that is the idea of personal responsibility and accountability, and how necessary that is in a functioning society. The experience in Drakengray Shinjuku is perfectly well done. You keep hearing it's a dragon temple prior to arriving there, so you expected an old, nondescript ruin, but what you instead end up finding are remnants of an ancient civilization that was far more technologically advanced than the current one. You're underground, and yet the sky is staring at you. It's such a cool environment, and it effectively makes you feel like you've stepped into a different world. Throughout the dungeon, you can find random items with descriptions that, if you're savvy enough, you can piece together that they are essentially stuff from our world. They describe it without saying what it is. So like, for example, they described a CD as like, you know, this small round disc, whatever. This temple for me has the best storytelling through environment in the entire game. The entire time it makes you think through theories and consider questions about the world of metaphor as you explore. At the end of the dungeon, you find that the dragon god is being controlled by a human with the facade of a twisted Mustari. To face down and defeat this human is essentially facing down the anxiety of the Mustari people and vanquishing it. Part of what makes this arc so compelling are the Mustari themselves and how they almost dogmatically reject different ways of life or deviations from their religion. For my money, they're the most interesting race in this game. I love the symbolism of the mask they wear, which is that they are willfully ignorant and committed to the idea that sacrificing a priestess is the solution to any bad circumstances that transpire. No Mustari person has ever been capable of intellectually challenging their system that sacrifices innocent women because they chose to mask themselves from any alternative way of thinking. The Mustari's commitment to their way of life is why they're so feared by the Sanctus Church. They know that they can never convert the Mustari people. After all, the Mustari people can't even convert themselves away from the lunacy of their current system. I just love that all of these different concepts and themes and storylines are coexisting in this section of the game underneath the surface layer of, hey, this mission is your classic go rescue the princess situation. Good luck.
And truly, I'm grateful. But as a priestess, even surrounded by such chaos and despair, I have already known such joy and freedom. To me, offering my life is no sacrifice. Those born into blessing must give back in turn. Such a duty is no more than simple common sense. It is the only way to live.
Well, that settles it. I'm getting you out of here. Deal with it.
Wait, but did you not hear a word I just said?
Oh, we heard. But fools like us rarely listen.
For me, this is my definitive number one for the best story arc in this game. I think the main barometer for what makes a fantastic story is simply how it makes you feel. And this was the most intense section of the game for me. Finally, after more than 50 hours of game time, much of which you had to pretend to be loyal to Luis, you are about to make your move against Luis and finally attempt to do what you set out to do 50 hours ago. You are going to try to kill him. I think it was a brilliant choice by Atlus to have you and your party essentially split up and do various different tasks to try to make this operation successful. Having a player split off and only be with Gallica and Yufa, means that the entire time you're making your way to the roof, you feel a sense of dread and suspense. Are your party members okay? After all, Fidelio had basically pieced together that you had given Luis fake lands. Did he rat you out, and is your operation already carefully prepared for by Luis? As for the fight with Luis, honestly, I think this is the best moment in the entire game. Luis says, "At last, your allegiance is laid bare." And the truth is, it's very cathartic after all of that time to finally define yourself as his biggest op and hater after pretending to be otherwise for so long. I think is a testament to the storytelling that they were able to scale the reveal up this much as a moment. Luis is aloof and overconfident in spite of the fact he faces 6 people with archetypes, and that he has a hole in his side from the lance he tried to assassinate him with. There's a full moon that gives the scene a beautiful lighting, and I believe also adds to the symbolic meaning to the scene as well. You see, a full moon occurs once a month when the sun fully illuminates the moon. The full moon is also the midpoint of the lunar cycle. This is meant to represent the moment you are in the story. Finally, you and your party members have stepped into the light away from the shadows of pretending to be loyal to Luis. You're fully illuminated as his biggest threat, and at the same time, you are essentially doing this at the midpoint of the narrative. I believe the full moon being so prominent here was a deliberate choice. This game is laden with metaphors that will probably honestly take multiple playthroughs to grasp. The conclusion of your first fight with Luis was flawless. While Luis is immensely powerful, he is not comically OP. After you win, he concedes that he underestimated you and your party, yet he still manages to get the upper hand on you. Thanks to Yufa's intervention, you are able to finally slay Luis, and he lets you know that killing him was pointless, planting the seed of doubt that maybe Luis didn't curse the prince. From this point forwards, the rollercoaster ride of this arc begins in earnest, and while the pace is frenetic, it doesn't feel rushed. There's a brilliant back and forth in your party on how to deal with Luis's death since he died in front of a crowd of people. There are competing opinions, but Stroll does well to take charge and control the situation. Fortin's calm, sanctimonious facade finally crumbles after 50+ hours at seeing Luis's lifeless body. While he attempts to portray it as a sort of shocked worry, realistically, if you read into it, then what we see here is him practically frothing at the mouth. I like that his true nature of being an unhinged powermonger who's simultaneously a cowardly snake is actually what leads to his downfall. You see, in his excitement at seeing Luis dead, he doesn't even question or think twice at the random monk who walks up to confirm Luis's death, and of course is later revealed that it was actually Zorba, and he ensures his resuscitation in this moment right in front of everyone. I'm telling you, Hall of Fame Glazer doesn't get more ride or die than Zorba. By the time you make it on stage, Fortin has settled himself and put his mask back on. I love that Stroll cries in this scene, as it's a great component in the ploy to convince you, the player, that Luis is actually dead. And obviously it also serves as a humanizing moment for Stroll as well. Fortin attempts to end the tournament for the throne, and when you confront him, his disgusting nature is laid bare. When Luis reveals himself in Ops Fortin, that shit is satisfying as fuck. The only flaw in his entire arc for me is the sequence that leads to Del's death. I have no issue with Del dying and that being the final piece to Basilio joining your cause, but the fact that that Sanctus family was just sitting there was kind of absurd. They had ample time to evacuate just like everybody else. This is an extremely minor oversight though that doesn't take away from the story for me. I do like the minor details surrounding Luis in this scene. He is surprised by the Magus brothers protecting those people, and when they do, he isn't personally offended that they did so. He's more so upset that they didn't stay committed to the cause. He doesn't feel betrayed, he feels disappointed. And after Del dies, Luis appears to be briefly saddened and frustrated, which contrasted brilliantly with Zorba's theatrically evil gloating. So we can see here that while Luis is willing to do whatever it takes, there are still bits of humanity left within him. It's not entirely easy for him to sacrifice so much to attain his goals, in spite of his unwavering commitment to do so. When you regroup on your Gauntlet Runner with your party, Basilio immediately begins contributing and suggests to you that to keep your foothold in the tournament for the throne and remain in a position to save the prince, it would be shrewd to have you impersonate the prince given your likeness, and the arc essentially ends here. If it feels like I covered a lot of different things happening in a short amount of time, that's because that's actually how quickly things moved in this arc. They did a wonderful job harnessing the chaos of this arc into a coherent, high-velocity thrill ride. And for my 2 cents, this was when I was most enthralled by the story of this game. The highest peak amongst the mountain range, so to speak.
What's the matter? You seem lost for words.
You came back to life?
You believe me resurrected? Even if I could defy death, I care nothing for the prospect.
Then how? How are you alive? Fortin's own attendant confirmed your death.
Fortin's attendant? You mean that fellow?
No! Zorba?
And who's that? Oh, it's Mr. MVP! Sim!
Thank you so much for watching. If you have a moment, please comment your thoughts below. The main reason I make these videos is to build community and connect with other people who love video games. If you enjoy the video, please subscribe and drop a like, as it will really help in the long run for us to build our community here. Check out some other videos on my channel for more content like this, and have a great day, night, or morning, and remember to be kind and thoughtful. Peace.